Yeah. Why does Roboto not show up in my Roboto? Why
Roboto.
does it not show up in my Yeah.
Oh, if it's GIMP, you don't have
Yeah,
to
it
like
doesn't show up
rebuild a
in
font
GIMP.
cache or
Yeah.
something.
What's that mean?
In
Tools.
what's what mean? Font cache.
Yes. It
So
doesn't just run off my computer's one?
yeah, sometimes it needs to like do stuff with them because it uses them in like high resolution and like you can scale them and you can do all kinds of stuff that is maybe not as
Okay,
easy.
sure.
Is this already end
Yeah.
stream? Oh, okay, we've already started. We're like 30 seconds in.
Oh, hey. Got them muted mics, or is the first 30 seconds me just babbling about how to do a
Yeah, us
picture?
talking about font caches.
Cool.
Does yeah, I think we're live.
Cool.
Let me. Oh, that's part of it. Discord is minimize all this.
Let me check your tubes. Max K is live right now.
You get the notification.
Wait a minute. I didn't get. Check your tubes.
Oh, cool.
Max K is live right now.
That's good latency.
You get the notification. Just a whole low tech way.
Well, no, that's how. If you want to see my screen, that was like part of the idea, right? If you wanted to know what I was working on, then you can bring it up on your computer, and that should then just mute it because obviously you've already got my audio.
Yeah, no, that works. Computer, and that should
Nice.
Oh, that's classy. I didn't notice that that font effect you chose down the bottom left. That's.
Oh yeah, no, I'm all about that font. So yeah, so the idea of what I'm doing here, is essentially. So I'm trying to put in explicit links where, I mean, that's probably not a thing, but it's so crucial to Flux is like first the idea that making good decisions in Parliament is like foundational. Like this is a top level idea with Flux. Another sort of important thing is that this idea, like introducing this idea of the best ideas, and that also decisions made in Parliament should be using the best ideas we have, is also sort of crucial. Now they're highly related, but I think it probably makes sense to have them side by side here. Like you could make 2 paragraphs about this sort of thing, right? Because ideas are particularly the new thing that we've got here. So it's sort of like the reasoning goes from left to right, and the supporting information for each sort of point goes underneath. But we want to try and bias like more top level stuff if it's important, and like if something's ambiguous, it could be top level or it could be underneath. Then we put it top level, sort of thing.
Yeah, again, all right. Do we jumping back to the conversation we're having just before we jumped on? Do we want to make a differentiation between Flux, the movement of getting IBDD as the primary decision model for society, and Flux, the political party that wants to use IBDD to initiate the best representation? Or are we trying to get this?
Yeah.
To be
So no, that is
for both?
that is sort of like appropriate. I'm not sure what the latency is for you, but if you saw that I put movement as the thing there, that's the movement is independent of any particular party, right? So ideas under the party should be stuff that's only under the party.
Cool.
It's like so like yeah, to most heavily influence ideas in Parliament, one must have representation in Parliament. This I think we can write more clearly. Is most heavily influence is not. the most powerful way of influencing ideas in Parliament.
Representation in Parliament is the most powerful way to influence ideas.
Well, the representation, I'm actually thinking of, what do you call it? Putting down here. So, largest influencer. Okay, so if we just say that, what do they call it when both major parties?
That top one's not okay. This is where you're saying in some rare cases. What were you saying?
So yeah, what do you call it when like bipartisan? That's it. So
yeah, conscious votes and very exclusive. Yeah.
Well, conscience votes, I would say, has more to do with the public perception, right?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get. Yeah, so I was trying to get. The public does have some sort of determination of what's the ideas in Parliament, but yeah, we're saying that representation is the most important one. And certainly the most direct, maybe.
Well, it's the last thing in the way, in terms of you can influence parliamentarians, but to directly influence the ideas in Parliament. So this is because our desire to directly influence the quality of ideas in Parliament for the better, that is separate to everything else, right? Like in many ways, this is a unifying factor for all Flux members, is that we have a problem with the quality of our policy and legislation and so on. It's foundational.
Yep. All right, that's cool.
So just that there's an implied sort of element here. Obviously, Pauline Hanson can influence ideas in Parliament directly. However, they don't necessarily get enshrined in law, like which we care about by implication, but I don't think it's worth expanding on at this point.
Yeah, because I mean and I guess this one sort of like it puts in for a lot of people that like the Flux party and want to have, you know, a representative that does that for them. That'd be great. I think it kind of puts it into the terms of realizing, you know, we can begin that discussion of, even if we had this one private member putting in private members' bills, the system is set up that even if they're the greatest bills of all time, they'll never get put through, unless we have this way to influence the ruling party or form a coalition, or
only by chance or coincidence, sort of thing.
Only if it's politically expedient for them to like jump on it.
All major parties pass good ideas to some extent.
Yeah.
And that's just at the end of the day, if they didn't, they wouldn't get voted in. Like, there is a base level error correction that is superior to, you know, rule by single party.
Yep.
Oh, you know what I should do, by the way? Or you can if you want. Do you want to paste this in one of the Discord things? If anyone's around?
Link? Yeah, for sure. I mean,
how many?
I was thinking about going live on the Facebook, but I might just put the link up for in the Facebook.
Yeah, if you want.
As like a hard YouTube out, so it's not like.
How many do we have online?
No, not click it.
Is that offline? Online? Oh wait, no, we can see the icons. There's a fair number of people online.
Do you reckon I throw an everyone tag?
I think if you do it, if you're going to do that, do it in a channel where people would likely mute it anyway. Like, I don't know about, what is general used for? Is general?
General.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, or at here is maybe, I don't know if at here works.
At here is a little nicer, yeah.
Just that if someone's what do you call it, got alerts on for mentions of about everyone, but they're like away or stuff, or busy, web export, do not disturb.
Yeah, gotcha.
Stuff like that. Makes sense. Oh, Leo's around. Idle.
There we go.
Yeah, neato. I always, oops, I got muted. Oh, no, I am muted. What do you call it? Oh, wow, that's like, what do you call it thing? I like my background, by the way. All right, latency's pretty average.
Cool, I'm back with you.
But yeah, I don't like streaming my main monitor sometimes because, I mean, this is fine, but what do you call it? Just because stuff tends to come up by default on there, right? Is there anything else I should put here? I can just drag this out. It's a bit empty as well.
The rotating Flux logo GIF.
Oh yeah. Hold up. Let me
Duh.
So this is one of the times where I don't like what do you call it? Hold up. All right. Where's OBS? This is the solution. Okay, yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, it's oops. Okay. Just that it brings up what do you call it? A file explorer, and there's like business folders and stuff that come up in the frequent folders and whatever else. Okay, it was the rotating thing that we were looking for, wasn't it? Flux spin Discord GIF 1 megabyte. That looks about right.
You're wearing some sort of business sports blazer.
No, I was in the thing underneath. It's just a polo shirt.
Oh no! I thought like it looks like you had a big lapel on. So you're wearing
some as in like here or whatever.
Yeah, your little jumper.
Oh, we didn't play. Where is it? I think I've got it on a thing.
Oh, jeez. Oh,
There we go. Can you hear that?
no.
Oh no, of course you can't because you're not on the stream. If you mute yourself on Discord, unmute yourself on the stream for a bit. Or mute the stream.
I can hear it now. Love it song. It's such a tune though.
There we go. Ah,
You sat and saluted.
sorry?
Sat and saluted for the whole song.
Well, not exactly, but I did
That's a hand on heart thing.
get my groove on.
Not a salute.
We've got the it's a bit it's not sounded exactly. That's close enough. I think we've got the design directly influence quality of ideas. Ideas in Parliament, we should have that separate. Like this.
There you go. Post will do. Okay. I mean, not that this document has the specific scope for us just yet, but something similar, sort of a document, like the way you're writing this is that that understanding of the difference between Flux's usefulness when there's Jesus, it's taking me a while to get out. Flux's usefulness when we've got one politician in. Flux's usefulness when we've got 8 in, and then Flux's usefulness when we are perhaps even the opposition, and when we're in true power or whatever. That sort of predicted timeline or potential timeline. Don't know if that would fit in somewhere.
So timeline-wise is sort of hard because, and it's also then not generic between different parliamentary or legislatures. Like for example, Queensland is one of those things where one year we could have no one, the next year we could have 30%, and the year after we could have 80%. Like as in, if the tipping point is reached by many electorates simultaneously, because Queensland doesn't have an upper house, right? So, legislative or legislatures with more than one elected representative per electorate are of more value early on.
Yeah. Yep. And whereas Queensland, I guess even if that tipping point might have been been reached in a bunch of states that have upper houses and senates.
Yep, exactly. In other states, we would expect to see, or in those advantageous legislatures, we would expect to have a far more incremental, or an incremental ascension.
Yeah, that's sort of like there'd probably be a plateau. We get one in.
Yeah,
it's there for every year.
We get a smoother gradient.
Yep. No, because that's another interesting thing. It's like having and it being stable at one, every seat of 12 having, or every senate of 12 having one flux politician or senator, being the review party or the review movement sort of thing, has its own benefits and appeals to people and stuff like that. So it's its own little thing as well that kind of comes in. It's like the Senate, you don't have to play for the whole bag to be really, really useful, but not necessarily powerful. If that's kind of how we're looking at it.
It's particularly the frequency of being powerful is much lower. Like, if Labour and Liberals agree on something, then it gets passed. There's just no question about that right now, right? They don't even need the Nats. So the balance of power is useless. But in those periods where there is, well, a balance of power must exist. Like, it doesn't always exist, right? If there's a clear majority in both houses. I mean, in many ways, the idea of micro parties in general has been that of check and balance and review, or at least that's the function that they've ended up performing. Sometimes, like, depending on their choices, that can be of higher or lower quality as such, or more or less usefulness. But
yeah, but it's still a function, even if it's not useful to you.
Well, I mean, it's
making effective parliament.
Whether it was intended or not, it's still a function. I think that's sort of the bigger point. Kip, what is democracy? Can you see that in chat?
Oh man, this is...
Thanks, Kip. I wonder how long was that up there for? What is democracy?
I'm not sure. I just saw that too. Cleaning my glasses, but he made just like the funniest, or just like, I don't want to call it lazy because it's not lazy. It's just like very basic. Just like an image of a lady questioning the sky with "What is democracy?" across it.
Oh, is that? Did he make a meme sort of thing?
Yeah, it's like, it's not even a meme. It's just like a picture. And he's like, "Put it up, man. Put it on the Instagram. Put it on the Facebook." I will. I will. What is democracy? Okay.
This needs to be broken down.
Yeah, because are we also sliding into Flux as the micro party coalition party?
Well, no, that doesn't really work anymore. Like, I mean, so there's a few reasons it doesn't work, and one of them is just that micro parties don't want that. There's a lot of ego in micro parties, right?
Yeah.
They the people who run at the moment, think about it, right? The people who only want to, increase ideas in certain ways, like, these parties of specific policies, like the Motoring Enthusiast Party, for example. They exist not because they're serious about changing policies necessarily. They might be, but that's not why they exist, right? Because the chance of getting into Parliament is not very high. It's a bad investment. So economically rational people interested in changing those policies go about it different ways. maybe they, make a not-for-profit that, lobbies stuff, or like, Get Up or various think tanks. There's lots of other ways of doing that that have a more consistent return on investment. However, they are never the gatekeepers themselves to the ideas, and so you've always got to be selling to someone. So if the selling is part of the problem, then you need to act directly, and someone has to make that investment at some point. And we are the people who believe that it's the most important investment for us to make right now because of the impact.
Okay, so then maybe we're like, obviously there's like from my opinion, political, or especially single issue parties, maybe not like minor parties that have a an entire world spanning ideology behind them. There are still those minor parties that do that, but single issue parties, at least theoretically, should love us because
Well,
we
we
give them
should.
a chance to show that, and we will vote alongside all the people that if they can get their members.
So I think like the idea of a minor party coalition like makes it's sort of intuitive, but it doesn't reflect it's not compatible with the current state of micro parties or minor parties. However,
Yeah.
we should expect essentially these like new sort of meta parties, I guess, or like flux parties. Flux parties is ambiguous. We should expect communities of people intent on changing particular laws and using particular ideas to form in a different way because Flux exists and we have a representative. In that it will provide a new outlet that was not available before. So we should expect a change in their behavior. And that would result in the sorts of groups that we would, ideally like to facilitate with something like a coalition of minor parties.
Yeah, it'd more be like we'd be the coalition for their members, but the actual party themselves as an
Yeah.
organization and as a
Well,
task.
yeah, they stop being a traditional
thing,
political party at that point, right? Because there's no point to them being a political party. They're better to exist as an entity within Flux because that gives them the greatest access to legislative change that they can have, or at least the one with the lowest burden or the lowest barrier to entry. And additionally, there's a synergistic effect between all other people who are interested in doing the same sort of thing but on different topics. And that means that you theoretically have the largest stable group of specialists. Specialists being more generic than experts or things. Anyone who would call themselves an expert would be included, but also just people who are interested in stuff that wouldn't try to call themselves experts but do want to see change on particular areas. And that's a much, much larger group, right?
Yeah, and that's, I guess, like your only worry there is that someone within the group of people who all want to make change in this manner is specific on your one issue on the exact opposite side, and I guess has as much passion as you.
So this is
at which point it actually becomes at which point it actually becomes whose message is better consumed by other people, which might not be as beneficial as, obviously, if you vote this way with us, we'll vote this way for you, as a party.
So one thing that I don't think I mentioned to you and Kip earlier. So my tutorial with Elliot on yesterday was about for the first 90 minutes. It was about an innovation of his called Yes or No philosophy, where basically it's a theory of epistemology, or it makes claims about epistemology, but also is a practical sort of methodology for understanding and breaking down ideas. Now, the core of Flux that we're talking about here, like in terms of ideas in Parliament, we identified this thing called ideas in Parliament that, democratic stuff often doesn't talk about directly. Definitely, like, parties with other purposes don't talk about that. They talk about particular policies.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a policy about ideas in Parliament, which is, unique. The basis for IBDD is based in fallibilism, like we mentioned that earlier. Particularly, I mean, in the what do you call it, article that we looked at before, I called it Deutschian fallibilism, but that was like not. That's just a term I made up because I didn't know what else to call it. It's broadly part of a thing that came out of Karl Popper's philosophy, which fallibilism sort of talks about, but fallibilism is broader than this, and this thing is critical rationalism. So fallible ideas is like the community that Elliot Temple runs, and the like, as far as I know, the only living tradition of born out of the beginning of infinity. It initially was the beginning of infinity discussion group, like on Google Groups, back in 2011 through 2015, I think, thereabouts. I don't know when the last post was. So that then became fallible ideas, but fallible ideas is then more specific, even still, than critical rationalism. I sort of like the term critical fallibilism. I think that's pretty good. So Elliot's the guy who runs that discussion group and the associated community, Discord and his site and some others. Looks like there was some messages in 2018, 2017, but there's like 4 in 2016, and then I'll bring it over here.
This is Elliot, the dude that was on the video you're
yep. So I'm going to bring that in a tick. We can see that actually most of them have been Elliot. And yeah, it looks like 2015 was really the last time it was active, or 2014. So even 2015 didn't have many posts. Anyway, and Elliot's been one of the only posters since then.
So Elliot's a dude that was he a English major that got into
I don't think he has a degree.
Or the Deutschian thought. Sorry, English minded anyway, or his structuring of writing is based coming from the philosophy, I guess.
Elliot's possibly the only person who has a legitimate claim to call himself or call David Deutsch his mentor. Is maybe one way to think about it.
Daddy Deutsch.
Yep, the guy who wrote Beginning of Infinity.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just trying to find the PDF because I've got. That's why I've turned the monitor off for a tick.
Okay, and he's turned it into a logical writing, I guess, or however you want to put it.
So
infallible writing?
No, not at all. Elliot gave, I think, more than anyone else, as far as I'm aware, but I'll give you a reason for that in a tick, gave a great deal of feedback to Deutsch about the Beginning of Infinity when Deutsch was writing it.
Okay.
Okay, is this going to open now? Come on, Acrobat, there we go. All right. My scroll, why Acrobat? Why are you so bad at scrolling? Okay. So particularly what I wanted to bring up as context here. So I know some of these names, by the way. Let me bring this stream back up. Display. Okay. Sarah Fitz-Claridge is, I guess, I think that like co-founder of a thing called Taking Children Seriously, which is a parenting philosophy about non-coercively raising children. And there was a discussion forum in the 90s. And I think this was where Deutsch did a lot of his philosophy work and discussion before there were more specific lists. But I'm not aware of the... Oh, great. Now it's going to open multiple times. I'm not aware of the specifics. There was also IRC for a bit, etc. She doesn't participate in things much anymore, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, Alan Forrester is still active on Fallible Ideas. He does physics stuff got some pretty good ideas. I think he runs conjecturesandrefutation.com. Oh, yep. But yeah, so we've got these list of ignore, and especially Elliot Temple. So out of these people who have participated in these philosophy forums for some time, I think I've heard Elliot say that he's been doing this for more than 20 years. So that would be like, 2000 or so, sort of starting, maybe late 90s. So it gives you an idea of how much stuff he's done. But he has written incredible volumes of work. And it's in the chat actually. And my background pre-DD was math chess programming. Yeah. So.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Is DD their direct
David
democracy,
Deutsch.
or did David Deutsch? I'm like, is that us? Oh, okay, cool.
Yep. Anyway, yeah. So Eliot's developed this yes or no philosophy thing. This sort of new ideas about and methods in understanding epistemology and breaking down ideas and stuff. Anyway, so we were talking about in the latest tutorial, which
maybe the chess background makes a bit of sense there. In the this branching paragraphs thing.
Well, I definitely think is like Eliot's had a lot of different, or a lot of like analytical things that have helped in understanding this. Like he was set up like better than other people are. Yeah. Anyway, so in the beginning of this, we talked through yes or no philosophy to a large degree, or not to a large degree in relative. If you're after the ceremony, then it's too late. Yes or no democracy. Yes or no philosophy, but to a large degree in terms of the episode or the video. We get where's the spreadsheet? So yeah, so one of the things here is about breaking down goals, and so we talked earlier in the episode about problems or like ideas are relative to goals. When we have or a solution is there's implied stuff there about how or what we're trying to solve. So we talk much earlier, for example, there's a pet example that we sort of come back to. So we need clear purposes or goals, purposes, problems for ideas, and use this idea of I want a pet, and that's really vague. People often express this in democracy when they talk about things that are really broad. I don't want, laws that allow people to have abortions, but there's a whole lot of specifics that have to go into that. And some of the laws that don't allow abortions, they wouldn't be happy with. Like, for example, a law that says no one can have any children. That's not going to solve the problem of not having abortions. But you can see how, like, things like that, or having sex is illegal. You won't need abortions if having sex is illegal, but that's going to violate the other implied stuff that person has. So we have to
want them to get to the point where they can say, maybe I want this method of due to these factors.
It's definitely important
without having to fill them in yourself.
It's not that I'm trying to get anyone to that point as such, but in terms of like democracy stuff, we should definitely be filtering out things that are too vague from like the legislative process. That's all pre-legislative. Like we want things to be well developed by the time we get there. But the sort of important point there is that ideas are relative to a problem. So there's always a whole bunch of like things on the background that aren't necessarily explicit in the idea that need to be taken into account. Anyway, where I was getting with this was to do with, I think I've started to have ideas around how to solve the budget problem within IBDD. In that, so we've had this idea of everything is just yes or no for some time in terms of the vote, and there are different reasons for that that come out of BOI. Or different is maybe the wrong thing. They've got a different origin. A lot of these ideas are built on things in BOI as well, but they disagree with ideas in BOI in important ways. So the idea of trying to solve the budget problem is to do with the way that yes or no philosophy breaks down goals into various components that we don't try and mix. So you can see earlier in the thing, in the notes there was this idea of, so particularly in this context, amount of goodness is an error that other schools of thinking have about how to do this sort of stuff, like epistemology. And this idea of Yeah. So when people talk about like that's a strong argument, or it's like 80% has a probability of 80% true.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah. So you might, I mean, one thing that you might be able to find these days is like physicists saying, "Oh, I reckon there's, 50% chance that dark matter is blah," or whatever else.
And we want everything to be 1-0.
Um, so in
It
terms
either
of,
is or it isn't, or
well, the the thing in this case is like, so yes or no philosophy makes conjectures about epistemology, and one of those conjectures is that, so A, that the idea of amount of error or the amount of goodness is an error, but also that everything that we care about in terms of epistemology can be expressed as yes or no statements, essentially, or questions or things like that. Like it is not the case that ideas have a probability of correctness. Ideas are either correct or they're not correct. That's just sort of fact of the universe. What that really means when we say correct is not necessarily like objectively true. It's that they solve a particular problem. So if I wanted a pet, and and I just said I wanted a pet, then if you just went out and found the first thing you found, well, you might find a rock first, and people have had pet rocks before, and you might give me that, but that's not like suitable. So anything that you'd offer, there would definitely be a yes or no there, right? But there's not enough information in the goal that I want a pet that for you to make a decision about the solution. In that there are things that you might think are solutions that I don't think are solutions, and that's because they actually contradict something that we can specify, but we're currently not specifying. It's either implied or we've forgotten it, or other things like that. And it's the case as well that policy is always suggested with the same sort of fundamental sort of construction, in that policy is suggested because it solves a problem. People don't write policy for the fun of it, usually, like with nonsense. There's no poetry in sort of that sort of. So it's always trying to change something, but that has to be relevant to the problem. So in terms of the most that I think we'd ever like interact with the legislative writing process would be to try and make these sorts of elements explicit where previously they're implicit. When goals are implicit, it means that it's harder to understand what's actually required. But in the case of like trying to change something, when goals are implicit, it means that people who agree might not realize they agree. They might not realize that there's common ground. They might not realize they disagree. They might compromise in a way that means that the end result is ineffective, but they both, for whatever reason, think it might be effective. In the case of the pet, it means you pick up the wrong pet.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
like one of the
so in oh sorry, just to like
go
get it back to, I guess, how we are trying to create maybe a system to alleviate that problem. And it's like, do we want to create a system that when you say I want a pet, it stops you there and it goes, is a pet what you actually want, and how did you arrive at that conclusion? Do we want to make that system? Because it might be that really you're actually just lonely, or you just really want something that's soft and furry, and I could get you anything that's soft. So we want the people, or whoever's proposing legislation, to go through those questions first. Or do we want to create the system that means when someone says I want a pet, the system has, like, I guess, reviews or a line of questioning that gets to that comes from the other side, that's like, okay, well, do you want this fluffy one? Like, it plays Guess Who. Because it's like, Guess Who is a game of I want to find a face. But if you say, does it have a beard, you could cut out half of them. Same with the pet. Do you want a fluffy pet? Cool, all right, we just cut 40% of the question out.
Yeah, certain things about the face, and you've got to, so, okay, one of the problems, like, the reason that Guess Who works as a system is that it's constrained in very important ways, so that the authors of Guess Who know a lot about the questions. In policy and politics, we don't know anything about the questions. We don't know anything about what we're looking for, what the nature of the solution looks like, what the level of detail, etc. There's also more problems in terms of how would we write a system to deal with that. Like in many ways, we can't yet encode information in anything except words. But words are ambiguous. Like we don't know if we can't write an algorithm to tell whether sufficient detail is in a sentence. People try, but often that's easy to trick. So I think there's things there. Now, I've put down two things, and I don't understand the difference between what you were talking about, I think. Like, we've got the guess who idea. I think I understand that. But the first idea that you talked about, what's that?
That we want, like, okay, imagine, obviously it's guess who again, and you want to find the face. You want to find the bald face with the red with brown beard. It's, you can do that by having the guess who board, like you say, contains only certain questions you can kind of think of. You are looking for a face. You are looking, it is going to have eyes, nose, hair, beard. It's going to have these signifiers. So that's what your questioning is based in. As opposed to, God, guess who analogy is falling apart. But yeah, it's do we want the person who's asking the question to have the best to be setting how to define what they want, I guess, or do we just want people to be able to say what
you
they
mean
want?
Person who believes a question needs to be answered and has an answer. Like if someone's submitting legislation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we want the system to expect that they know how to get what they actually want out? On the full system-wide structural, all the facets of government, or do we just want them to be like
within some extent, like what we like, as in we don't know whether each individual will know that or have that capability, and we don't know if each idea will
presumably
do that.
They don't is the thing. Yeah.
Well, often they don't, at the very least, or at least that, like right now, if we have an issue with the way that policy is done today, right? We don't believe that the quality of ideas in Parliament are high enough, then, I mean, what we're saying is we have a system that is better at correcting errors than the existing system, and it's worth focusing on because any errors we know about that we don't correct now have ever compounding ramifications.
Okay.
Like not solving errors means we keep making them, and that's then waste. So if you want to get better exponentially, then you need to be able to correct mistakes in a continuous manner such that you are able to build on ideas exponentially. If we can't reliably create and assess new ideas because we're making the same mistakes over and over again, then that will have an effect that is essentially exponential going into the future. In that if we have a mistake over and over again, our rate of increase at that point, so say we make exponential progress generally, right? And that's generally what we see with people, at least, in terms of civilizations. So we make exponential progress. If we, hey Kip, if we,
Hey, brother.
Hey.
So if we have a constant, right, a constant thing holding us back. So say we're making X number of errors, where it could be half X, right? Whatever that, for some constant, or C and half C, right? In terms of an exponential curve, we essentially, our slope is reduced by a certain amount, and our rate of growth is reduced by a certain amount continuously, and that means that that exponential curve, because the current or the future position is dependent on the current position, and the current position is lower than it would be otherwise, it means that the future position is much lower than it would be otherwise.
It's the same analogy as the butterfly effect, right?
I
mean,
no.
it's the COVID stop the curve thing.
Yeah, it's
It
definitely
works really well.
it's definitely like well, sort of. That's a little bit different because it's a sigmoid, right? So in terms of cumulative cases, presuming we're talking about immunity. So like with an infection that spreads throughout an entire population, then the curve is always an S curve. It just depends whether it's a really tight S curve or whether it's a slopey one. Now, if it's eradicated, then the curve stays really low, which is good, or it's preferable. Obviously, there's a cost trade-off, but when we're sort of talking about that like stretching of it this way, the way to sort of think about it is if you cut it off at a particular point in time, right? That's what we're sort of I need to get back to another idea after this about infinity, but if you cut it off at a particular point in time, right, then it's much lower when the curve is stretched out. Like if we think about those S curves.
Yeah.
And the reason that that's significant in this case is not because it's an S curve, but because it's deliberately not an S curve. Like progress doesn't end as far as we know. We've got no good reason for believing that progress or the creation of ideas will end, or that our ideas will stop getting better in any particular way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's I guess I was looking at, say, in that case, the immunity that we see on those curves is understanding of the idea, but then you're actually looking at the fact that it's not. It's actually progressing the idea, because if this mass of people understand the idea, then something's going to be added on top to it. And considering everybody has this base understanding, it should be easier for them to adopt this new additional kind of piece of information.
Yeah. So
hence why it kind of
the
fingers
more
crossed it's a big old spike.
the more knowledge you have, and so the more knowledge you have, the more ideas you're able to play with, adopt, understand, create. It's easy to see this in many examples, like engineering. We were talking about, what was it, Kip, writing for engineers? We were talking about that earlier, and
the books, A Guide to Writing as an Engineer.
So if you think about engineers, right, they're able to build skyscrapers because they've got all this base knowledge about like other architectural and structural components.
Yeah.
So having that base knowledge allows you to do more. All knowledge works like this. And knowledge, in general, is the primary component of policy, or at least the consequence of knowledge, like the direct output.
I mean, I guess it's like some future version of it, thinking of it as a Flux app that generates policy based on better knowledge and constantly growing, knowledge. I guess it would be the way to, when you click on a piece of legislation that, maybe say right now it's like a tweak it's an amendment to blah, blah, blah bill, to be able to see that backwards chain, not only in like the legislation as it's been amended, but the philosophy behind it, and even like the data and stuff like that. To kind of bake that into legislation understanding amongst normal people.
So we'll need that to some degree at some point, because like law, if we can sufficiently codify law, then we'll be able to analyze links such as what bills this like a new bill makes obsolete. So we'll have like a bit of a graph of that, and then we won't be able to do more complex like Git operations sort of thing on the ideas themselves. But we'll at least have like there'll be a history that's encoded in the democratic / legislative interaction. Anyway, so all of the ideas that I was just talking about in terms of knowledge it's all in BOI. So if ideas are what make policy, then policy, and it's sort of natural to understand that policy also builds on itself in an exponential way. Like the better our policies are, the better our ability to do new things enabled by those policies. So we have a flow-on effect through pretty much the entirety of like culture and the economy. Sorry, you were quiet / muted then, I think.
Oh, that was just me. That was me whispering. That's the revolution bit.
I think one interesting thing that we're going to see come out of the Flux and the process along with Flux is the idea of micro amendments and micro bills.
Yeah.
Making tiny little adjustments, and I think that's going to play a big role in what you were just talking about then, Max.
We'll see a lot more of that in the near future than the far future.
Yeah. And so, like I feel like a lot of bills that are being made, a lot of the details within them can be trying to solve problems that don't exist yet. And if we're, doing micro bills and micro amendments, then we're just solving real problems now. And I'm kind of drawing upon our methodology for creating the app, where we're literally just solving the problems which are in front of us instead of, creating big, obviously we have an overall plan strategy for the app, but in terms of like the details, we're not going to be solving problems that are imaginary problems that don't exist. And I think the same can be done with policy when using Flux.
Well, there's in terms of policies that problems that don't exist, they're less valuable to solve, right? So than the ones, or at least predicted problems rather than current problems. We'll definitely see like incentives at work in terms of what people prioritize in what order, for sure. Yeah,
and so you might see down the line, this is going to be a problem.
I hadn't really
We should expect our reaction time.
It actually makes us like my mic's dying out here. But whether like those private members bills like that, a lot of the time, if you think of a Flux person giving a private members bill or a Flux MP putting a private members bill down, it's this like giant piece of bill that's been poured upon and really crowdsourced to get the greatest conclusion. But a lot of the time, we'd be able to put down, really useful small incremental changes to even just a bill from 1982 or something that wouldn't get reviewed in the normal system until there was like a giant review of the entire overarching structure.
So I think
that's actually really cool.
That's one of the ways that we'll be able to be productive early, is not actually being responsible for passing those bills, but for being people who introduce them and can introduce them more readily. And then as well, these little micro bills, there's lots of like little mistakes that you hear about occasionally. I mean, one thing, for example, is like in New South Wales, it's illegal to drive with high heels, and it's also illegal to drive barefoot. It's also illegal to drive with thongs. So if you're a woman, it's a real like and you're really set on obeying the law. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to go anywhere if you wear any of those things. So that's one of the things where people at the RTA drive cars with high heels on. I know because I have a friend who drives works at the RTA or the RMS, I guess now. Sorry, God, that's an old one. But yeah, Roads and Maritime Services. Who drive with high heels on. People can do it safely. Removing that from the law is like a micro thing. So if major parties are going to vote against it, are they doing it on principle? They're voting against Flux on principle, in which case that's something that their voters should probably know about or care about. If they're not voting against it on principle and they're voting against it for a good reason, then cool, like that's fine. But not all of these things are going to be voted against for good reasons. Like, unless they're voting for a lot of them, and if they're voting for a lot of them, that's a really difficult, sticky position for major parties who are threatened by us.
Yeah, that we just keep popping up these good ideas that they didn't do.
Why didn't you do it for so long, for example?
Yeah, that's actually really, because I always think about we'll be the people that get the votes for medical marijuana, and we'll table that bill, and it's like in reality,
it's basically been tabled before.
Yeah, and the major parties can just pick a couple of holes in our in our spelling, pause it for a year and then bring it up on their own as an election issue, and suddenly they're the studs, and we proved their own numbers, so like it backfires, as opposed to having these small things that are like impossible to argue against, and the only reason you'd be voting against it is to troll us, which is just makes you
for
look
bad
trash and us
reasons.
better.
Because I mean, if you have enough bad ideas, then you're inevitably, it doesn't matter how much someone agrees with you, you're inevitably going to find some difference that matters. So like, I mean, Nathan, has talked about a friend where I think they're both like hunting buddies, and the friend votes Liberal, and Nathan was sort of like, "What do you mean you're voting Liberal? Like, you know that I started a political party. Like, you said that you like this. Why are you not voting for us?" And he was basically like, "Oh, well, I basically agree with everything they say." And then Nathan was like, "Oh, would you agree with, their particular things on gun control? Because, the Liberals have policies on that, and hunters aren't always for them. Like, that's one of the reasons the shooters and fishers exists." And the guy was like, "Oh, now that I think about it, maybe not." Or I don't think he actually knew enough at the time. And then Nathan told him a bit, and he was like, "Oh, maybe I don't, agree with them as much as I thought." And so if we have these micro bills, they're going to be over a very vast area, and they're going to eventually, like, little populations at a time, but they'll piss communities off that major parties are voting them down. There's some from like coal mine related legislation, like coming from the Hunter, with lots of coal mines. Anyway, there's some stuff there that's just like ridiculous injustices in terms of stuff like compulsory acquisition of land. I think has some really odd edge cases, so that some people are bought out for 2 or 3x their property value, and someone else next to them is like left and then has this big diminishment on the property value. And there's like weird edge cases that you could basically just cut stuff out of legislation and improve it.
Yeah, and just fix loopholes and
Just like, I mean, there's mistakes in there. That's it. Is like our current process is not so good that it's free of mistakes.
Yeah.
So it matters that people are able to do it, because we want the one person who has the best idea on it to be able to have an avenue to contribute, and ideally, they're also somewhat good at communicating and can, like, via this whatever sort of channels we have set up, like find the other people interested in such an idea, or have everyone else interested in that idea be aware of it, such that they can either vote for or against it, and then having delegation chains and stuff increases that potential. I get the feeling, by the way, just unpacking the conversation stack, you were asking before about like how to do bill submission, and do we have like a goal field on the text stuff when you're submitting a bill?
Yeah, well, I guess. So like not even actually how we will do it on day one, but what's its most glorious form?
Well, in terms of
when
like
it's
we can't know about, like, I think we should be really clear not to try and do any like information processing at this level in IBDD itself, in that we want it's a different problem, the idea of figuring out how to judge knowledge in textual or other encoded form via an algorithm. So we can't make the decision whether a goal is sufficient or not, or what sort of questions can be asked, or the nature of the solution. But we can make sure that that is explicitly put, and we can make sure that other people are making that decision. People are the creative forces here. This is just a system of organization, not of processing knowledge.
I guess it's almost again. Hopefully, it uses that same mechanism of like, do we should we? And I personally think no. Some other outside organization should do it, but should we do 70% of that kind of what you would expect would be the right way to go, in order to push the conversation and the thought along the way of how does legislation work, and how do you actually craft it.
I think we want a system that's really what's the word, like atheists, but less people like the word more. Agnostic. It's more agnostic to the idea of legislative creation methods. Like, we don't want to restrict that. We want no restrictions on the creation methods, but we want a really good system of, like, figuring out which ones are good and bad. We can't have a system that directly figures that out, because that requires understanding knowledge in a way that would basically mean we could write in, like, an AGI or something. That's, like, a very difficult problem, but we can figure out a way for people to more effectively make that determination. And people already do that.
Yeah, I think the pull request model is a pretty good model, in my opinion. You know, you suggest a patch, you make a pull request, people look at the pull request, suggest edits, you know, it becomes a...
So, yeah, so one of the ways that we might facilitate that, so this is not in sort of the current plan for IBDD, but I think it's probably a good starting point, is essentially before you can actually put legislation up, you have to publish what you're going to put up. So there's this, like, the current thing is, you, using liquidity tokens, you bid on the slots for new legislation. So the liquidity tokens are a way of doing both voting on issues and bidding on slots. I'm not actually sure that's the best way to do it, but we can introduce a second thing if we need. There are other downsides to that, though. So if we do this with the slots for new legislation, then if you just get the slot, then you can sort of fill it later. That's useful in some ways, like arbitraging across time, so that someone can acquire a slot earlier and use it at a later point. But maybe we want to put that price signal in the price of the slots for legislation themselves. Anyway, but if you have to just make your legislation public beforehand, and it's then a draft, and only once you buy the slot does it become a not draft, then in essence we just have to, you know, have at least the capability to link to a discussion forum, and people can work on that and update it. They can have, like, literally just a GitHub repository as the backend, and then even have it auto updated when the thing in the GitHub repository updates.
And then tying it back to the micro bill idea, you know, making a submission is not going to be so scary if it's a micro bill compared to, you know.
Yeah. It's really, really approachable. People can do that with a low error rate because it's highly specific, and it's only about things that exist now. And particularly if it's, like, taking things away or adding things in a way that's been, like, done before or has predictable effects, then it's potentially, like, very low error rate very quickly. That's not what we should expect. We should expect a lot more trouble than that. But it's definitely a good thing to start on compared to trying to, like, you know, redo the tax system. That might eventually happen, but I don't think that's going to be very quick at all, because it's so vast, touches so many things, that there might be some incremental things, but it's not like anyone can sit down on an afternoon and detail the specifics of a new tax system, except maybe in principle. Like, everything should be a sales tax.
Do you know what could work, like, or might be worth thinking about, is, like, I guess, like you say, when you're buying with your saved Flux capital, your Flux
liquidity tokens, those things.
Liquidity tokens, yeah. Having the amount it costs be, you could buy, like, a blank if you want to insert your entire new legislation, but also have, I guess, a cheaper price to buy and edit on existing legislation.
They're equivalent, unfortunately. We can't really work at that idea. So it's like, for example, you see omnibus bills, and you see
just touch heaps of shit.
Yeah, they touch tons and tons of stuff. And the way that legislation and parliament works, we can't change the encoding format, right? In that we have to be compatible with the existing system to some degree. And the existing system can touch our legislation once it's put in there, right? We don't want to encourage people just to put lots of ideas in something when they're not interconnected. Like, we want to encourage people to encapsulate ideas cleanly in legislation. So you could break ideas up or put them together, right? If there was too much, or put them in different bills, put them in like co-opt existing bills.
Yeah, that's kind of what, like, or even, you can buy a
But we don't want
blank.
those things, right? We don't want bills co-opted. We don't want people's bills that are just about the rights of geese to, I mean, to have stuff about yellow cars in them.
Yeah, that's it. Like a portfolios work this way in government, but it would be the more portfolios your proposal touches, the heavier it is, the more cost it takes.
But the incentive then is for, like, everyone has the incentive to some degree to, like, combine everything into one portfolio. The people who are behind that will end up getting more like potential out of it, sort of thing. Maybe sort of they give a bit to everyone by that because it changes things globally. But I mean, I don't think we want, like, the other way to think about it. Everything is an edit to the big book entitled All Our Laws. Like, everything is an edit to the same document. They're just different parts of the same document. That's their unifying feature, is that they're all laws.
Yeah.
So, because the idea of changing it based on, like, whether it's an edit or a new law or things like that, because that comes up with these different, like, side effects, but also because it's inconsistent with viewing things in multiple ways by rephrasing the question as, an edit to all our laws. That inconsistency, I think, it means it's a worse idea than having no distinction between edits on new legislation. Is everything is always a change. And so all changes are treated as equal. And that we can do in a principled way.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're just changing an and or to or.
We'll say
really,
that
it's the same as a.
If someone wanted to, for example, change pronouns in bills, right?
Yeah, there we go. That shouldn't cost as much as fundamentally restructuring.
It touches how many things? How many bills?
Yeah.
But it makes more sense as an edit, right? It's an edit to our body of legislation. It's a control F across everything.
Yeah, as opposed, which is that it should be noted that in reality, sort of thing, that's a control F across some text.
How do you note that?
How do you note that?
You can't do that by algorithm.
Yeah.
And the only tool we have not to do it by algorithm is to do it by vote.
Yeah.
So we're now going to have a voting system to manage the cost of issues in our voting system.
Which is, hey man, is like, seems to be what everyone seems to want. We should vote on how much we vote on how much we vote.
When I was really like trying to be set on how on the idea of delegation by category, I had this problem of, like, how do you define these categories, right? And the problem is that you can't do it objectively or systemically, or systematically. You've got to, like, the solution that I ended up coming up with was essentially that there's a vote on the categories, which makes sense, but you want to disconnect that from the other voting system. So now we have two distinct voting systems. So,
well, I mean, there's the hashtag system, which is like kind of voting, but it's creating a new vote that everyone agrees to take part in.
But so think about, like, the Steam store, right? So if you've been to the Steam store, so you'll see that I think we can probably find one of these games. What have I clicked on? So there are user-defined categories for this product.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a strategy, but it's also an action, but it's also a shooter.
So I've got this sign-in thing here because if I categorize it, that's voting on it. That's voting on the categories. The reason that these, like, Souls-like, I'm not surprised. The reason these categories have been chosen is that the act of people doing the categorization is voting, and so they show the ones that have been most categorized, which is just a particular type of voting. If we
so, that's hashtag voting.
We should be careful about adding more voting systems to our voting system. I think it's probably fair to say that we should be able to do this without needing like another system of problem solving on top. And the solution that like I think is the better solution is that you delegate based on the proportion of your political income. So you give 20% here, 50% here. And that also means that you're making a different determination about what the ways that you're doing delegation is, that you're saying, I value these things in this relative way, as opposed to saying, I value this person within this category. Because the people that you're going to be delegating to are going to be specialists. So that's the equivalent of voting by category, is because that person cares about particular things that you're delegating to.
Yeah, but I still like.
But we don't need categories now. We don't need another voting system.
I don't want to give a scientist who is the greatest envirotech scientist in the world 20% of my industrial relations law stuff. Does that make sense?
Well, what makes you think that the scientist would bother voting on that thing? They would just let those votes go into the system and get political capital out. In fact,
yeah, but I've delegated to them, so then I've just like lost my.
Yeah, that's the point of delegation.
Yeah. But because well, in which case I guess that then maybe it requires that you'd have to be notified how often your delegated power is actually being used, maybe?
Well, definitely, like, delegatees need an audit mechanism. I mean, people should have the choice in that. Like, you know, do they want to know how frequently? Do they want a summary? That sort of stuff we can give them. Like, you can do that via our algorithm. You can give them a weekly newsletter of all the actions that their delegates took. And if they see a delegate who's, like, meddling in stuff that they don't like what they think, then they can find a different delegate who has similar ideas on the topic they cared about, but doesn't have this other thing. It's also then an incentive for delegates to specialize only in an area. So not to try and be an expert in everything. So that's a force against demagogues.
Yeah, okay. And that cult of personality kind of vibe. How do you get delegates to be able to self-identify their specialization?
Well, we already know there's specialization because we don't follow them because they're delegates. Like, think about if people started putting this thing on Twitter, right? We already know what the opinions of this person are. Like, we've got an idea about them already. And so all of that implicit knowledge in our social structure is already there, right? Like, a lot of the seeds of ideas that could end up in legislation is already out there. It's just a matter of how does it get from inside this person's head to a legislative change.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess it boils down to that. Like, it's not up to us to build the system. Really, at some point, there's going to have to be like society and the people use their systems. Because and I guess I was kind of going with like, what do I do if I just have the military? I have no resources. I wouldn't. I'd probably not really know. I would, but imagine I'm my mum. I wouldn't know where to start finding someone to delegate on my military decisions. And if I were to use
this is a problem with
YouTube.
This is a problem of voting or delegation by categorization. But there's a reason that would be a hard problem for you. Right, and that problem is that you don't care as much about it as the other issues that you would make delegations on where you do have an idea. Now, it might happen that there's a military issue that comes up in the future, like there's a big societal discussion that's going on, as occasionally happens, and at that point, like, you're actually doing all the stuff you're about to say about, like, research, like going to YouTube or Facebook or finding journalists. And so then you start to have an idea. And then, as well, how is that going to change? To know that you can make a change in your delegation straight away and begin to influence an issue overnight, how is that going to change your pursuit of quality delegates?
Yeah, because
are you going to have a higher standard on ideas now?
Yep, I like that. That's actually a pretty cool one. Of like, just for those rebuttals of like, then all the lefties will just give all of their power to blah, whoever we hate,
to the big
or,
lefty.
Yeah, although or the righties will give all their power to the big righty.
So this is actually, I deal with this in my badly written article. Where is it?
Epistemologically unsound.
IBDD is as an instantiation of Popper's criterion embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's this section down here about like, okay, we've got like someone's putting forward bad policy, someone's putting forward bad but good policy, and this means that the policy in general is dishonest, but it is well engineered for a particular like subtler point, or like, you know, like someone trying to write themselves an advantage in the tax code but not make it obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the case of like just good policy simpliciter, so it's just a good quality idea. There's good policy that harms some group, so essentially that has to happen sometimes. There's got to be a correction. The easiest example that people would identify with is the wrong term, but that people would be able to recognize is ideas like tax the rich, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's a good idea or not remains to be seen, or any implementation of it is, because that idea is not specific. That problem statement, that goal, is not specific enough to know whether an idea is suitable or not. And there's a lot of background stuff there, like, you know, we don't want to not have iPhones in the future. We want to keep stuff like iPhones. So if we just taxed anyone who earns more than X at more than, like, you know, at 100%, just took all their money, then, you know, would we have people like Steve Jobs doing what he did to start that thing? Yeah. And so we don't want bad side effects like that. And that's implied. Basically everyone's on that bandwagon, at least the vast majority of people. So good policy that harms some group. Like if there is some good idea, but it's a correction to an existing like imbalance or injustice or something like that. Again, I'm not saying tax the rich is that. I suspect that most people's idea of tax the rich, it would be incredibly harmful in many ways.
Yeah, it's more like.
But that's another case.
It's more like tax the rich, the example, but tax the rich exists now due to the imbalance. So it would need to be put in to correct that imbalance. But you need to kind of be aware, or it's stupid to say it now without being aware that at some point it'll have to, you know, tax the rich has negatives as well, and they will have to be dealt with. And not only that, you know, the system can be done instantaneously tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So it's actually, you know, it's a better way to do things. But corrections do need to happen.
If corrections
are going to affect,
So there's a case here dealt with that, or dealing with that. And then two opposing sides, both with bad policy, where they're unwilling to cooperate, and then when they are willing to cooperate, and what happens. Anyway, so the idea generation, the only thing that's really relevant for idea generation is like this one at the end, because essentially they are the groups that are going to go on a process of, or going to be more open to new knowledge in this situation than they were before. Two opposing sides, both with bad policy but willing to cooperate. If they're not willing to cooperate, they're unlikely to seek knowledge anyway. If we have like good policy that harms some group, or just good policy alone, if it's bad policy that's just pretty obviously bad, that'll get voted down. Good policy that's pretty obviously good, we'd hope gets passed now anyway. I mean, every time we have a government, there's legislation that falls into the good policy that harms some group category. But there's also bad policy that harms some group. So, but that's not an interesting case here because it's just under bad policy. And particularly this last case, there's a lot of opportunity there. And the thing is that everyone, all ideas that people come up with have errors with them to some extent. But that doesn't mean that the errors are so great that it can't solve the problem that they're interested in solving. If you want to, like, throw a ball, you don't need general relativity. Like, you know, just knowing what a parabola is enough. You don't even need to know about gravity at that point. You can just say that things follow a parabola when you throw them.
Ball does the shape, yeah.
And that's sufficient. That's wrong. Like, we know that that's wrong. If you go up really high, or you like go really fast sideways, or you go so fast that you leave the sphere of influence of the Earth, then none of those things hold. But it's fine for throwing a ball. So in the same way, legislation doesn't have to solve every problem. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better.
And I think as a general rule of thumb, the smaller the idea, the smaller the errors.
The more easy it is, when people try and tackle smaller problems, if they do need to do things that they aren't doing, like they're making mistakes, then it's much easier for them to correct those mistakes and come back to the task. Like, it's easier to do those small problems with a low error rate. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. I'm just putting it in different words. And
with that added benefit as well. That error correction is easy.
Which added benefit, sorry, were you mentioning?
That error correction is easy.
It's easier for them to acquire the skills. It's easier for them to do without acquiring skills, or they've got a lower error rate than when they try big things. Yeah. So the incentive then as well, if we think about it in terms of the size of the issue, the most productive groups are going to be those that tackle small issues.
Yep.
At least at the beginning, if you've got a big issue that you're trying to tackle, then you're going to have to spend a lot more time getting that robust, making sure it's really good, because it affects a lot more people. It's got a more the solution must have more reach.
Yep.
In order
and
to,
then you have a greater chance of opposition.
Well, the chance of opposition, or the size of the set of people who would oppose you, is dependent on essentially how much you touch with the legislation, right? Which is roughly equivalent to the size of the problem.
Yep.
If you spend time getting a really good solution, then you'll satisfy a lot more people. If you don't spend time getting a good solution, so your solution's worse, then more of those people will disagree with you about whether it's a good solution or not. Presuming that communication isn't an issue, which it might be.
Yeah, even though they might vibe with the fact that a solution needs to be made, you're on the right track, blah, blah, blah. It's like the more you insert there, the more reasons to just, and it's when it's yes, no. It's not yes if this changed, or no if this changed. It's yes or no. So if they can, the more facts, the more things it touches, the more singular things they can have a problem with. The more, the worse it's going to be.
The more they need to be far more capable to touch big things. You need to be very, very capable to touch a lot of stuff.
It needs to be pretty flawless.
Yeah.
And I think another great little side effect, because I'm just loving the microbill idea, is that it's going to be a lot harder for, say media or, social influencers to
blow it out of proportion.
Yeah, exactly. Put their own spin on it, or even put propaganda against whatever you're pushing, because it's so small, anyone can understand it like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, in the most trivial case, it's like correcting a spelling mistake, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
How can you argue against it? It's like, that spelling mistake's gonna cause the end of the world.
I mean, arguably, the spelling mistake didn't cause the end of the world anyway, so it's not a really important problem to solve. But yeah. But then if there's
it just may as well be solved.
Say there's
Yeah, go on, Max.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, so say there's a bit of legislation that is bad because it just has something tacked on. Right. In that it's like, here's this great idea, and also Max gets $1 million a year from the government. Like, the micro edits, a lot of those micro edits can just be removing things. And that's not, like, if it's that sort of thing, it's not impossible to argue against. Now, a lot of stuff is more complex than that because legislation is written to be somewhat entwined with itself and other bits of legislation. So some of those micro edits might actually be really big things. You can, I mean, for example, it's important to realize that the size of an idea is not at all related to the size of the amendment. It's very easy to see why if you take an extreme case. You just put a not in front of murder, for example. Like, if you just put negations in strategic points, you entirely flip the thing on its head. Right? And particularly in something like the criminal code.
Yeah, okay.
Like,
Okay, yeah.
so that could be a one-word edit in the most extreme case, particularly if it's like
I mean,
citizens.
this is still the presumption that people are at least editing to maintain the original point of the bill. You know, to make it, like you say, better at what it's trying to achieve. At
Some
least
of our bills, like for example, the Electoral Act, there's nothing about the goal of that in the bill. It's just procedures, policies, like stuff like that. You know, there's a commission, there's a commissioner, there's a register of parties. The commissioner needs to add stuff to the register of parties. Like if you put "not" in front of some of the statements in the Electoral Act, it would have incredible ramifications for democracy.
Yeah, and then at the same, like any edit like that, you know, oh, we're going to change it to "not." It's so obvious to shine a light on.
Yeah.
That it wouldn't be a problem, like, or shouldn't be a problem,
Yeah.
unless the system's not robust enough to pick that up.
So yeah, so making sure that access to information is good is important, but as in making sure that information is readily accessible is important. But also, the ability to correct mistakes if they do happen quickly is also important. So, for example, let's say that, you know, this is one of the classic things, someone saves up all their political capital and then they try and do this "not" trick sort of thing. And they spend it all to, like, or they spend a lot of it to get the issue put up in the first place and then to, you know, buy all the votes and whatever. And people are complacent because why wouldn't they be, right? Everything's been working well, or, you know, things like that. It's so obviously bad that so many other people are going to vote against it. So there's no point them voting against it, right?
I'll save my capital.
Yeah. And then if it gets through, then it's like, oh, fuck. So we like, the easy solution to that is that there is just a different process for recently passed bills. That reverting past bills is treated as an acceptable operation or a known operation that is important to do. Whether that means that it's just proposing a bill that just undoes that, and there's just a waiting period, that's the simplest way of implementing that, I guess. Like, bills don't come into effect until 3 months after they're passed, and during that period there's like 12 opportunities, if it's per week, something like that, 13 opportunities for people to undo it. And if they don't do it in that period, then arguably it's fine.
Yep. And to come back to your original, one of your original points is that I suppose the cost of proposing a bill or a change shouldn't be determined on the size of the change in text, for example. Instead, they should be all equal.
Not that they... Well, we've got to break that idea down more. So the end thing that was like, or we agree on the idea that the size of the change in text and its epistemic size, sort of thing, the size of the change in meaning, those are distinct, and we can't measure one from the other. There is no way that we know of, to measure epistemic size except through the creative interpretation of humans. People need to think to figure out whether it's, like, what size impact that has, whether those ideas are distinct or not, because sometimes it might be that there was just a typo and "not" was forgotten, and, you know, it was talking about, you know, a little avenue down a sort of particular policy, so it's like, "and no car shall be yellow," and instead it's like, "and no car shall not be yellow," or I don't know, like, you can imagine, or like, yellow cars are illegal, but there's actually this is a rule about paint, and the special case is actually that yellow cars are not illegal, but other yellow things are.
It's like to say yellow cars are taxis, or taxis are yellow cars.
Like, yeah, like, this shade of yellow is not available for commercial use or outside of taxis, right? The "not" in there is obviously epistemically quite small. It could be disruptive to a small group of people to a large degree, but again, that's a small group of people. So epistemically, that idea isn't very big, but it's exactly the same size as saying that eligible parties shall not have 500 members who are valid on the electoral roll, for example, or something like that. Where maybe the introduction of "not" could put a maximum size on parties as opposed to a minimum. And that's epistemically very large as an idea. That affects a lot of people and a lot of things. So the acknowledgement that we should make is that we don't have a way to measure it except through the creative interpretation of people. saying that all changes should therefore be equal in cost, or at least judged independent, their cost should be independent of the epistemic size. One of the ways to do that is to basically just say that everyone who does a change at the same time pays the same amount of liquidity tokens.
Yeah.
So their equality is only a default. It's not the fact that that's reflecting reality. It's just that we don't have a good way to do it, and we don't want to bias away.
And so I think as a strategy, say for someone wanting to put forth a bill, you would want to make your epistemic size of the bill, like the impact, as small as possible, so that you've got you're affecting less people and hence having less opposition.
As small as possible, such that it still satisfies your goal, your problem statement, right?
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be back in a tick.
Cool. But
like maybe. Sorry, I was just like well caught in my brain again. It's like maybe when you decide to edit something, you have to note what effect you believe the words that are on your legislation will create, and either other people or an AI or an algorithm or whatever,
or just a forum.
Literally, or just a forum, upvote, downvote, Reddit, whatever it is, but some sort of system that confirms that the wording used does provide, or is likely to provide, or is with a high degree of certainty going to provide this solution.
Yeah.
The TLDR, the explanatory memorandum. Do we need that? Is that actually what you?
Well, obviously,
what you're buying. You're buying a solution. You're buying a solution, and then you suggest how to achieve that solution. Like someone going, I want to tax the rich. You're actually, that idea is there, and you're purchasing the intent, or you're using your Flux to get an attempt to put that answer there, and there'll already be a captive audience looking at responses to that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, it does. Yeah, I just wonder, and obviously I can't say the future, but I just wonder if when a micro change is suggested, that will it become kind of a community effort, and say law experts will help step in and make the wording correct for the judicial system, when obviously it gets there, and say, okay, yes, we see your intent, but just the wording's wrong.
Yeah.
And so this is what you want, and there's great, thank you for helping me out with that.
That I actually think is cool, because then you can almost go to this like static pool of people who can word things correctly, as opposed to having to.
Well, that's what our current legislature has. They have experts to call.
Yeah, and that's what everyone that argues against Flux that the reason we have MPs is because they're also super smart. None of some of them are quite intelligent. They're all got most of them have got college degrees or university degrees. Sick, but
they all get
teams are actually consultants and specialists in the fields. So
yep. And sometimes lobbyists come up with the legislation, or think tanks. It's not, necessarily them sitting down and writing it. In fact, I think it's probably
they come up with the data and the outcome. Some specific legislative lawyer person actually writes the legislation.
Yep,
and it's certainly not fucking Scott Morrison himself.
Yeah, comes up with everything. And the other thing that we have is currently is the debates, which are actually considered, especially when it comes into the judicial system. and the explanatory memorandum that comes along. So, this is the law, and then how do we interpret that law, which is obviously the role of the judges, and they will actually use those things, the explanatory memorandum, the debates, everything that surrounded the creation of that law, and I imagine that we would have something similar alongside. It's like, this is where the discussion happened. This is why this is the intended use of this law.
Oh, Max, you there?
Yep.
Yeah. So I was just quickly chatting, and I hope it makes sense. But rather than people sort of bidding or attempting to put forward their bill and have other people interpret the bill and the solution it will provide, have people actually attempt a solution. So, saying going back to tax the rich.
Do you just mean like trialing a policy type thing?
Or more just that the effect we want to gain from the policy is pre-announced just on a forum or whatever, or that's the like, say, it would be tax subfolder, equalizer tax brackets subfolder, tax the rich, and from there people could attempt to provide a solution to that. That way they can be judged on whether the words in their bill just provide the solution that they're saying it does.
A discussion forum?
Yeah, kind of, but a little bit that I mean, yes, it is a discussion forum, but that that way everyone can work on one piece of legislation, and then one person comes along and crosses the T's and dots the I's, rather than that one person going ground up.
Would rational actors not want to do that regardless of whether we provided it or not?
Yes. I mean again, society should make this, but they're not.
So, part of the reason they're not making it, though, is what's the use?
Yeah, chicken eggs.
So, I think it's one of those things where, because it has low marginal utility right now, right, or low comparative utility. So compared to the other things they could be doing, why would they work on this? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to the other reasons, or compared to the other things we could be doing, why do we work on Flux? Well, we believe that this is really important for ourselves, society, the future, and we, at least to some degree, perceive that this is the best thing for us to work on. Out of all the options of things that I could be doing, right? Sometimes I write software, sometimes I do ideas, sometimes I, like recently, do all this tutoring, right? And it's because I believe that that's one of the best things for me to do right now. And it's a problem when we don't do that, when we do things that we don't believe are good things for us to do right now. Either it hurts us economically by, for example, not earning as much as we could otherwise, or it hurts us in terms of doing things that are against our interests or what we believe is good, and so we're philosophically hurt by that, and emotionally, personally,
spiritually.
So,
well, pretty much.
Yes, but not today.
Yeah, so that's socio society hopefully provides that. It's the same with fucking everyone that argues that the people are too dumb. It's like, of course, most people don't know anything about this stuff.
We've got no reason to as well,
because there's no reason to. Yeah, exactly.
Now,
all I have to know about is some issues that make me feel good, and then I can stick my finger up at you when my election team wins.
There's a lot of other bad things about the way that people learn, and particularly in school, early life, and in adulthood. And there are other things that might be holding them back as well. But it's definitely not a good argument to say that people are dumb, so we shouldn't have direct democracy or any form of democracy that allows people to directly engage, which, by the way, is already contradictory with the idea of voting for representatives. That's the same thing to a degree.
Yeah. We'll get there.
It at least involves a lot of the same sort of thinking processes. It's just that the marginal utility of a vote right now is very low. And really what that means is the marginal utility of one's participation in politics is very low. So if we can increase the marginal utility, which by the way is a thing that's different for every person has a different way of measuring that, what issues they care about, what impacts happen in the world. If we can increase their marginal utility of participation, of course they're going to care about the quality of their ideas more because it now has more relevance. People care more about being good drivers when they're driving, really fast on a racetrack or again, with cliffs on either side or something like that, than when they're, going 40 k's an hour in their back streets in a cul-de-sac. And people should care about, driving to different amounts or the quality of their driving to different amounts depending on stuff like that. So that the same thing will happen. People do have their common sense, and a lot of common sense ideas are not all bad. Sometimes we don't know what their limits are, so we apply them incorrectly. But I mean, there's a reason that a lot of our ideas have stuck around, and they're not necessarily bad ideas. Some of them are.
Well, and also if you just think about it, I mean, the more brain power you have on a particular issue, surely you're going to get a better solution rather than just 50 people or
definitely
many.
The size of the potential the catchment for ideas, yeah. Because criticisms are ideas as well. The process of improving a document is also a similar process in terms of error correction and iteration and so on. Conjecture or cycles of conjecture and criticism are they're built into IBDD, they're built into democracy fundamentally. They're built into our brains in terms of that's how creativity works. When you get an idea and you're like, oh wait, oh no, okay, it doesn't work. That's because an idea was good enough to come to the forefront of your mind to actually be brought forward and presented to you as a conscious sort of entity from whatever unconscious processes are going on. The idea was good enough for that, but then you found a problem with it. But most of the ideas that you have, you never reach that point. They're thrown out earlier because they're not very good.
Yeah, it's only the ones that bubble all the way up that your criticism idea or your ideas of how it would break catch up later.
Well, a lot of ideas of how it breaks are already dealt with, but definitely the worst case you can have is an idea that comes up and you think it's really good and you work on it for 10 years and then you realize it's wrong. That's pretty much your worst case, right? And that has happened.
Sorry, it's not funny.
Oh, I didn't hear the punchline you made.
I think we're the punchline.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. Is if there was some reason discovered tomorrow that what we're doing is wrong, it could be okay if it's a fairly minor reason, it's easy to adjust. But if it's a really big reason, then it's oh, bugger, I guess we go home.
Yeah. And there's so many large software projects that, have, it's been someone who's oh yeah, that's a really good idea, let's do it. A few $1 million later and years later, it's oh, okay, no one actually wanted this product that we're developing.
Yeah, you can make a really good app that no one uses, and that makes it a not very good app.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, luckily we've got what were you saying, 2,500 years of proof that people want this?
Well, I said, what was it? What is democracy? Well, it all started about 2,500 years ago. I think that's about right.
Oh, and FYI, that is definitely a meme. What is democracy?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have any examples?
I was what if it's your artistic, it's your artistic peak is that picture, so. Although I really want that the meme of the kid with the butterfly. I actually don't know what cartoon it's from. But is this blah blah blah?
Oh,
Snoop.
Yeah.
Is this a morality or stuff like that? Yeah, the anime guy.
Yeah, we definitely need that. A bunch of 50-year-olds in suits making decisions in a dark room. Is this democracy? Because obviously everyone knows what real democracy is, and that is not it. One day we'll be a meme factory, though.
Yeah, okay. So, this is the... what do you call it? The thing. This old meme.
You actually bring some memes up for me, thank you.
I've
Yeah,
got-
mine not too fresh memes.
And see if you can include these memes into this tree that you're making as well.
Oh yeah, I don't know about that. They'd be pretty far down.
Top memes.
And then there's actually I was confusing it a little bit with the I see you're a man of culture too.
Actually, really, like, I've never seen the original. Is this a pigeon? Mind blowing. Never knew what it was about.
Is that actually the original thing? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now we've just become meme historians. There's a pigeon. That's funny.
So to kind of bring it back, what is the trunk of the tree? Would you say, Max?
The trunk of the tree goes this way, goes left to right. In that, these are the big outliney statements. They're like the topics of paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like making good decisions in Parliament is important. Decisions in Parliament should be made using the best ideas we have. Ideas in Parliament, which end up enshrined in law, are determined by the ruling party or coalition. We, Fluxes, have the desire to directly influence the quality of ideas in Parliament for the better. Creating a political party is a necessary action. So the trunk is like up here, and the branches of each idea come down. So under ideas in Parliament, which end up enshrined in law, there's like one must have representation in Parliament to directly influence those ideas. Specifically for independents or minor parties, having a small representation, e.g., blah, is advantageous when in the balance of power. And then registration is acquired by persuading voters to vote for you. And so then we can build on basically everything to the left in terms of the ideas, but we've got to make sure they're supported.
Awesome, good work.
Okay.
I might leave you guys to it.
All right, cool. Thanks, Ben.
Gotcha.
Did forget we were doing that. Well, I didn't.
That was the... Do you have the stream up still?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, this tree takes us from, can you scroll left? Sorry. You could scroll to the start of it, if we're going to call it that.
I have.
Oh, just did it now. Cool.
If you're a bit behind, hit the click on live on YouTube. The button, if it doesn't have a red dot, it's got a grey dot. That means you're behind. If you got a red dot, you're within a few seconds.
I'm red live. I think I've just got
Did you click it and it came red? Or you can also sometimes you can get a few seconds behind. You can speed it up for at 1.5 times to get back up to present.
No, baby, I'm streaming. No, I was just trying to get to. Does this take it from IBDD? I guess we're not going for IBDD means good decisions in this one. This is just.
Well, this will
takes this as fact that IBDD will make good decisions, and henceforth this is logic.
It's not that. So IBDD itself is one of these little branches coming off potentially. As in not this one, like this one. I mean, at some point, what we don't have here is the concept of idea catchment and how to get ideas from people's brains into law.
Okay, so maybe one of these ideas is that's maybe before good is before good ideas get to Parliament. One of our other tenets is that we believe we need to get the ideas from people's brains into Parliaments. That works, and not only that, but we believe that the more brains act tapped, the better.
So
Or
the way that I
think
sort of,
attachment of ideas is better.
I'm trying to think about it.
Hmm.
The way that I think about it normally is the set of participants should be across as many people as possible because they're the people from which we can source ideas. And in order to get the highest quality ideas in Parliament, it means that we either need an algorithm for telling where the high quality ideas are, which is impossible, or we have a very large population, which is basically like the direct democracy part. So the idea of including everyone in the set of voters on issues is not an axiom in Flux. That's a consequence. That's a reasoned outcome.
Okay, so by axiom, do you mean like purpose, like a thing that we pivot around? Is that how you use axiom?
You could sort of interpret it a bit like that sometimes, but no, by axiom I mean a statement that we take as fact without questioning. So
Okay.
in like
and ours is that specialists with the most passion will create the best ideas,
no,
and
but
and a way to get the most of them. Okay, sorry,
it's
yeah, go.
so specialists come up later, right? In terms of that's then more specific because that's like some people have better ideas than others. So that's like
Yeah,
a thing later on. That's a separate thought. But at this stage, all we know that ideas exist in people's brains, and in order to get them into law, they must have some chain of events which starts with them in the brains. So we need a way of making sure that we don't exclude good ideas, and the easiest answer to that, and the answer that most people can agree with, is include everyone and treat them equally. That's a common denominator between, like, that can satisfy a lot of people's goals, but
yeah,
other ideas have, like, for example, trying to do textual analysis and try and figure out what they're talking about, and then cross-referencing that with university degrees or things. Those algorithms
yeah,
will have unintended side effects. Like, for example,
yeah.
if we did anything based on university degrees, I would be excluded. I don't have a uni degree.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's almost built in, it must be built into the system that we don't take things on authority. That contradicts other principles of ours.
yeah,
So some authorities would satisfy some people,
yeah.
but
Because I guess
no authority is going to satisfy everyone.
yeah, because I guess I was trying to get to, so far we've only said that we want to get good ideas into Parliament, right? Like so far as actual fact statements from this.
Yep.
So we do need a bit where we define how we get the best ideas. Because someone
Yep.
some could follow all along this way and be like, all right, cool. Well, they must have some great meritocracy. That's how they generate the best ideas. Or like you say, yeah, university degrees, and the person with the most university degrees therefore makes the best ideas. Because I guess that that's our process. That's where it becomes our belief, right? Or our philosophy. But it is our belief that the best ideas will come from not excluding anyone, as opposed to someone else
Well,
who might have the idea that the best ideas are going to come.
saying the corollary is probably easier. I hope I'm using that word right. So including all people/voters means we aren't going to exclude the brains with good ideas.
Yeah, that's a better way than saying to get the brains with good ideas, we have to include everyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
including as opposed to all people ensures that we do get them.
we can say any system we propose to implement must have a way to get ideas from brains to law, and then including all voters means we aren't going to exclude the brains with good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can go sideways and say some people have better ideas than others. Right, and that's where we can say, people So they might have been exposed to something for some time and have a lot of, time to make good ideas about that thing. Some people have studied a thing for a long time and have a lot of prior knowledge, so they can make good ideas about it faster.
Or people can have good ideas for lots of reasons. It might even just be worth being like, there is no definable characteristic for why a person would have good ideas. And any, brackets, and any attempt to create one will end up eventually excluding how to get that bit across.
Yep. Let me get back to that in a tick.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, or any system of excluding ideas inevitably will exclude a good idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, representative democracy is just a really complicated way of excluding people.
Yeah, or it's a really convoluted way of including everyone while immediately excluding.
Yeah.
Because apparently we want to exclude all the dumb normal people, as is everyone's.
So yeah, so we already have a way of putting experts in there, right? So, and broadly speaking, we don't have a better way than, there's a lot of cynicism about the incentives or where the ideas come from that end up getting enshrined in law, from unions or banks or whatever else.
Lobby groups, yeah.
Lobby groups. Lobby groups so a lobby group is also like Lewis Rossman, right? Have you seen his YouTube stuff?
No.
So he has thousands of hours of live streams of electronics repair. Right. Does a lot of stuff on MacBooks, figuring out that this transistor is broken and replacing it.
Yeah.
He's also spent a lot of personal time, energy, and money lobbying in favor of a bill in the US or a collection of bills called the Right to Repair, and particularly the Right to Repair Act. The Right to Repair Act is basically companies aren't allowed to stop you from, tinkering with your electronics you buy.
Yep.
And we've got lobby groups on one side that do things like, he has an example about a congressperson or a legislative official, elected official, who had a lobby group representing Apple approach him and convince him that there was a difference between a Mac and a PC, and that when you alter a Mac by, for example, running wires between different things in a way that Apple hasn't sanctioned, it turns it into a PC. And this hurts Apple in a substantial way and whatever else. Anyway, that's obviously false. But
It's
But-
kind of true.
no,
It becomes a personal computer.
yeah, but it was beforehand anyway. That's not what PC means, right?
Yeah.
Or at least Apple don't advertise that's what PC means. They had a big advertising campaign about exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Lewis tells the story basically because there wasn't like a good lobby group in favor of like, homebrew electronics and stuff, right?
Mm.
He's a lobby group, like advocating in favor of what I think is the good side, what he thinks is the good side.
Mhm.
To say that lobby groups are bad would to say that he's bad, or his actions are bad. And so lobby groups is a very error-prone way of talking about legislative forces. So
yeah, or it's or it's inherently everyone thinks it's a bad thing, and it's also the only effective way to get good. Yeah. So. Is that a good point?
So we've got down here a voting system is a solution to this problem. Like there's no good way to judge ideas except creative input of people.
Mm-hmm.
Way of separating good ideas from bad ideas, particularly to make decisions. And then we can start with like, to most positively affect the quality of ideas in Parliament, we need a way to judge ideas. There's some things about epistemology.
Yeah, would Elliot have got mad at you for writing such that?
It's sometimes appropriate, but I'm definitely noticing my writing is worse now than it was at the beginning. Like I was putting things better before. I'm sort of just at this stage, sort of getting ideas out. I'm losing my creative juices for the day.
Right. I was actually about to call a 6 o'clock tap out as well. So I like this. What do we need? Because we want it to get to. Does this bit, we are capable of designing a democratic system that is better than current alternatives, require that ours fixes the problems of those current alternatives, or that ours is better, if you know what I mean? Better due to its being different, or better due to it fixing their problems?
Well, particularly we believe IBDD is a system which best satisfies our goals. So, and a lot of the goals we've made explicit over this sort of thing here. Like we have the desire to directly influence the quality of ideas in Parliament for the better. So, and we have implicit goals that we don't mention, like also that doesn't kill everyone. Not that would be a good idea, but yeah, we've got implicit goals in there too. So IBDD is a thing that does this, right? Now, how we expand on that, at that point, maybe this should not be here. There should be stuff in between still. But I think we do need these bits, like to most positively affect the ideas in Parliament, we need some way to judge them. So that's like epistemology sort of comes under that. and we're capable of designing a system that is better than current alternatives. So we have like knowledge about knowledge such that we could do a better job. There's also like
Because I mean, are you seeing this thing right here as a website, and when you click on these, it bumps you out to a little 500 word essay?
that would totally be one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I'm seeing right now, and I'm like, that'd be really cool to just bring people along on that.
Oh, we don't even have to say this. We could even just say like here, what is this part?
I'll zoom in.
Oh, yep, sorry. So like here, I was thinking is essentially more like this, where like we think a better system can exist and we're going to try and design one while also looking for other ideas, and this is then a thing we can hang off it. But even that, I don't think we even need that, because then we can make this IBDD stuff like democracy about problem solving. So this is like separate topic now, right? The construction and reason for IBDD doesn't involve most of this stuff, right? Like it doesn't have to do with fluxes. It doesn't have to do with like this stuff necessarily. Like this is all things for arguing why IBDD is better, right? But why IBDD better is because of our goals, right? Not because like that's not part of IBDD, right? IBDD has its own goals. So IBDD is like more particularly, it's like we want a system that like is able to judge ideas, right? That basically is aligned in the direction of progress, that gets the best ideas in there. So it's aligned to our goals, but it's not the same thing, because IBDD doesn't say like I should have a political party.
Yeah. IBDD just wants to get the best ideas, the most progressive, or create progress amongst ideas
as fast as possible.
We want to attach it into Parliament and government.
Yep.
Or Flux wants to, wherever you want to delineate.
Yep. So IBDD is also appropriate in other cases where like where good ideas are necessary, but there's no Parliament potentially. But we also know some limits about that, right? In that we know that like one of the reasons that it is good is because it reorganizes political power between issues.
Yeah, and certain things like a parliament and stuff obviously works really well for that, whereas certain other decision-making system or certain other decision-making communities might not benefit as much from it. So you mean
the benefit that IBDD can
sectionality of decisions.
There needs to be a diversity of issues. The more aligned a community is, the less useful IBDD is. The more it just approaches normal liquid democracy.
Yeah.
So liquid democracy is not bad in stuff where everyone's already aligned on goals and things, but law is particularly like the goal is just to promote like order and prosperity sort of thing. It's a really like I mean, is that even general enough, like order and prosperity?
To make good, that'll do. Yeah. To make life good for people or something. Yeah, it's very vague.
Rules we live by in society so that we can get along and make progress.
I don't know, man. I don't even know if the make progress is
it is in the sense that no system that doesn't have that goal, or at least that consequence, will survive, because if you don't make progress, then you'll just have something that wipes you out eventually. Like, I mean, the government of Easter Island, as such, that was responsible for cutting down all the forests. The reason that Easter Island is much more bare than it was thousands of years ago.
Change the system. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Also potentially aliens. I watched Ancient Aliens.
That system did not have that, or was at least not good at doing that, even if it did have that goal. And thus evolution took over. So solving problems has to be part of any solution that survives, or at least has to be a property, because evolution applies to everything. Kip Crossing, space research, please. I don't know when Kip said that. Report inappropriate content. Hide this user in this channel.
Block. Report space research, please. Oh, no one knows what he's saying.
All right. Well, I've got a friend upstairs pinging me, so probably a good time to finish up. We had the 6 o'clock tap out. That's 2 hours 15 minutes. That's a good podcast right there.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. Good chat. I also, I mean, like, I want to make this document a living website thing where you just click and it batches out into, as we were saying, or like, you know, some sort of video or some sort of content out of this stuff, where this is going.
You want to make a video out of it, out of the live stream?
No, not out of the live stream, more out of this document.
Clips and stuff. Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's not good enough yet, right? In terms of like
what this turns into, but this idea, like, we've never really had a good one thing that goes from IBDD to government to Flux Party, and you can see that there's differences in all three of them.
It's why I'm bad at writing, and it's why I'm bad at writing, and so keen to. It's because I was bad at writing, and why I'm so keen to try and improve it.
Hell yeah! If this is what you're like, if this has all come out of that Elliot, bro, then this stuff's cool. It's really cool.
Well, particularly my learning is greatly accelerated at the moment, because of tutoring.
Cool. Yeah. No, that was when you first were like, I'm doing tutoring. I thought it was going to be like
I'm being tutored. I guess is the better way of putting it. But
more. I thought it was going to be like more English lit, like classical writing or something like that.
Well, I mean, you can watch the grammar stuff. You'll see, like, we talk semi-regularly about the orthodoxy and the difference between the way that it's put forward in the article, which, by the way, is a publicly accessible article. It's just fallibleideas.com/grammar. I was going to say democracy, but no.
Flux.org. Oh God, sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Kip. When you say, I should probably make the chat bigger, shouldn't I? In that, I was thinking that earlier, and then didn't for the entire thing.
That's fine. We'll eventually get around to making like a hard background for this. Could someone get us one that's animated and blinks every once in a while?
I had it's not hard to make the chat thing appear in there. It's just so much easier to just drag the window on, right?
Yeah, I know.
Also, I can remove things here, like if there was a problem, or do whatever.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, it's so much easier. But to be honest, you just cut some boxes out and drag it in underneath. It's like
there's a thing, like there's like a widget in OBS for it. But yeah, so anyway, so I need to work on this more, but it's sort of coming along. This is a good structure for like talking about stuff. Like a lot of these things could be independently written about almost as essays. And there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff here which
I'd love to see, man.
Would be easier for people to tackle as individual things, like one-offs.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who could write a decent sort of post about why making good decisions in Parliament is important.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, obviously, it's like, dude, there's a reason I never returned to uni, and half of it is, literally uni, but the other half is just that writing is I'm not bad at it, but it's painful for me.
Well, one of the other things
I can already see making little videos, like just being able to make a 6-minute video on every one of these little topics with like a link back to, once it's all fleshed out and pretty, here's the document this comes from. That's already where I'm looking at it. I'd love to see people type.
I think that's pretty cool. The making more or just more formats of content. One thing though that occurs to me, like, I mean, writing is typically painful because we're bad at it, and we can get better. But one of the things about uni is that uni does not, in general, make your writing better. Like, you need more effort than just doing uni to make your writing better. And in many ways, it can make your writing worse because there is another game being played at university, which is being impressive with your writing. There's also like other games, like, being friends with professors or things. But university teaches us a lot of bad habits about writing.
I wouldn't say I'm bad at it, but it's just painful. You know, it's just not an enjoyable experience.
I mean, yeah, I say I was bad at it. I'm still bad at it. Like I haven't practiced or produced anything that proves I'm not. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, Doug. Good chats, man. Yeah, I'm on 6 weeks lockdown, so the more you want to do this, I am probably definitely free.
Cool. Well, when I work on this next, I'll if you guys are around, that'll be cool.
Keep bumping us.
Sweet. All right.
All right, Doug.